Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I'm going to show y'all how I made this necklace. So let's go ahead and get started. So in making this particular necklace, I started out by making a resin cast of this component, which if you aren't into electroforming or copper's not really your color or you just want the sky is the limit, you can definitely wrap bare resin too. And this design also works for any large hold kind of hololith or donut bead, so it's not particular to just this style. Sorry, words are hard. You could also sculpt something from polymer clay or ceramics or found objects or literally anything that's just this shape-ish. So I used Art and Glow. There are separate tutorials that I'll link to for how we made the component, but I just went through with like an emery board and tidied up the edges, coated it in graphite, and then put it through the electroform process. Now sometimes whenever I'm electroforming, I'll get like very, very bumpy results, and sometimes I'll want to keep that, but I always pass all of my work through a rotary tumbler for about like 6 hours, and that way even if there's lots of bumps, it's very, very smooth. Like it's very, very smooth and rounded. Sometimes some of my electroforming will come off, but then I'll just touch it up with some more electric conductive paint and then put it back into the solution for a while. You can see on this one I actually went through and filed down the bumps, and then once I pass it back through the tumbler, you can see the difference that it can make. This one had started out very bumpy, and then to demonstrate I filed, sanded, and polished and then tumbled a section of it. So you are able, if you do a thick enough of the copper plating, if you do that thick enough, then you can file it down and get some really nice almost cast looking results. So I don't know, that's just to maybe tantalize you into picking up another craft beyond just wire wrapping. But whether you're working with a purchased component, which we do have some different shapes like this in laser cut, as well as like resin cast, and we check out our Etsy shop, I guess is what I'm saying. But you can just shop around and find components. But also this is, I want to demonstrate the difference between a highly polished copper, and this I've passed through liver of sulfur, and I've actually had this component in stock for like almost a year now, so it has aged really nicely, but you can shine it right back up to a high finish. So we are going to start with our tools. The only tools here that are like very vital are like these 4, but I recommend all 6 if you can. I've got my flat nose, my wire snip, my round nose. I just like these. They're stepped nose pliers. They're essentially the same as these guys here, but with a smaller tip, which I think is great for getting into tight areas. My bent nose pliers with my thermoplastic modded handles, and some mandrel pliers. You could also just use knitting needles, or any kind of mandrel would work well, or you could just also use your round nose pliers. We also have 28 and 16 gauge copper core wire from parawire.com. This is silver plated, and then it's been coated in a titanium toned enamel, so it's very nice. This stuff doesn't tarnish even if you put it in to liver of sulfur. It holds up really well to long years of wear, even if you have very acidic skin. As long as you don't like attack it with sandpaper, it holds up really well. So we're gonna cut 2 12-inch lengths of the 16 gauge, and then I'm gonna do a full arm span, so about 5 feet off the spool of this 28 gauge wire. You could also use 26, but I prefer the 28. It's a little easier on my hands and doesn't beat up my fingernails as much. I also have some 4mm silver beads, some 6mm copper, some chain from the Ring Lord. This is their 4mm, which is like an 18 gauge wire with a 4mm inner diameter. And then these are copper rings that we coil and cut. They are 18 gauge 1/8 inch. but you can also get those from the ring lord as well. And then just a little lobster claw clasp or whatever you like, and then some 2mm chain from the ring lord also. Again, links for everything will be down in the video description. So we're going to begin with, and this is a very beginner friendly project. I just wanted to kind of lead you guys through the process of taking something from the components to a completed piece, because I know whenever I was first starting getting into making jewelry and stuff, it was kind of like, okay, I can make the focal point, but how do I make it into like a completed solid necklace? So this is definitely a great launching point for y'all to take your own creativity and inspiration and do all sorts of stuff with. So if you want to follow along with this tutorial and send me pictures of it so I can feature your work here on the channel, that would be amazing, because I love seeing what y'all come up with. So we're beginning here. Let me see if I can't zoom in. I'm going to try my best to stay in frame, but good luck. We're just starting by wrapping our 28 gauge around our 16 gauge, and I like to use my bent nose pliers to just smush that so there's no little pokey bits. And then we're going to come in and we're actually going to coil around the entire length. Now, some people use drills and stuff. I think it's good to be able to do that, but I think it's very good to just practice your hand technique, doing it by hand, because sometimes you'll find yourself in wire wrapping situations where you're unable to use a drill, and in which case having a good solid foundation technique of just hand coiling can save you a lot of time and hassle and effort. And so I just do about maybe 10 rotations and then I smush it down. And whenever you're doing coils like this, you want to try to keep them as close in next to each other as what you can get. Now, I could get a little closer than that, but I found that that's good enough. Whereas if you do them too far apart, like let's say like this, whenever you smush in, do you see how that's just a little baggier? Like, it doesn't look like much right now, but whenever you start really working with your piece, it makes your tension inconsistent. So a way to fix that is, if you're doing that, is to just kind of grab it with your fingers and cinch. You could also come in with your pliers and just kind of gently cinch it down a little bit tighter. But again, I'm keeping a pretty solid grip on our core wire, and I'm maintaining tension as we wrap around this way. And you can hear that. I don't know if my phone is my camera. I don't know if it'll pick up on the audio, but I almost run it over the back of my fingernail just to, as non-essential, but it helps me maintain the tension, and it's just something that I notice is a habit of mine. So we're going to keep doing this until we have done the full length. So just coil and smush, and keeping all that kind of together. And also, if you, let's see, to demonstrate again, if we coil, 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 and we're getting really inconsistent about our spacing, so kind of like that, and then we smush it down, then it's going to have spring back, and whenever you touch it, again, it doesn't look like much right now, but these variations can really start to add up. But again, if that happens, just kind of cinch everything in, almost like you're wringing out a rag. Just, oh, I popped my knuckle. But yeah, so you can cinch that down, but it's better to just work almost do 5 rotations and then smush, and just kind of check your work as you're going. So 10 rotations and smush, and that way if something starts to get messy, it's a lot easier to check yourself as you go along and just build good habits right from the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and coil the rest of our length, which I'm already about halfway done, and then I'll meet you guys right back here. The main thing we want to avoid when we're coiling is that we're not overlapping coils that we've already done. like if that happens, you just kind of undo your work. You can use nylon jaw pliers if you want, but this is thin enough that I can just do it with my fingers. And then kind of come in and carefully make sure that you're not backtracking, just so that we're doing a single layer of coiling. So hopefully that can help troubleshoot you guys into getting nice consistent coils, because coils are the foundation for all other wire weaving. The better you get at maintaining your tension and your spacing on coiling, the better you'll be at weaving later on. So we have come now to the end of our wire, and I've smushed it as well as I can with just my hands, but I do like to come in with my bent nose and just moving in the same direction as what the wire was going, like kind of going with the flow of it. I'm just grabbing and cinching around, and this is smoothing down that loose end. There we go. And I do like to test touch to make sure that there's no little pokey bits. So with that being done, let's scooch this wire down to our coil down to the center of our wire. I do like to, when I'm making coils, if I can, make it close to the end of the wire, because, or the end of our core wire. Just it makes me feel like stuff's a little less in the way. So now we're going to come in, and I have a little bit of a curve. Let's zoom out if we can. You can see I have this little bit of a curve to our wire. I like to bend against that curve. So you can eyeball it or use a ruler, just however particular you want to be. Don't squeeze too hard with your pliers as you're gripping, because this 28 gauge is pretty thin. You can't actually squeeze through it because it's a quite soft wire at this point. But I'm just gripping there, and then quite firmly putting a nice maybe 70 or 75 degree bend in our wire to get that nice kind of V shape. And so now we have our other core wire. Now this one you could weave around. I'm leaving it there because I think that's a nice kind of contrast in textures. And again, gripping and just bending very close. I'm putting the pressure with my thumb very close to our pliers. And you can actually, whenever it's just bare like this, I like to use my work surface to press and to just get as sharp of a bend as I can. To demonstrate with some scrap wire, if we come in and we've gripped it, we've gripped the wire, and if we apply pressure here, we get a much more rounded bend, which sometimes that may be exactly what you're going for, but it's good to experiment and see what kinds of different results you get with different, just with different hand and plier placements. And so, whereas if we're right here, boop, it's a much nice tighter bend. So again, it just depends entirely on what you're going for. And so now we do also have the option of, at this point, I'd recommend going and doing a little bit of hammering if you wanted to texture your wire. I wanted to go with just the round on this one, so that's what we're doing. And I want to get the look of us having wrapped with 2 wires, but we're still going to wrap it just one at a time. So taking our focal component, finding the center, I want to place this wire, let's zoom back in, so hopefully you guys can get a solid view of what's happening. And sometimes it can be kind of difficult to get the bends to happen where you want, so I'm actually bending this in just a little bit more, and I'm just going to hold right here with my pliers and get that bend started. And now we can open it back up into the V shape that we wanted. You can use your pliers to kind of smush a bit, get that straightened out. But that's going to give us a whole lot more control, I think, when coming around, feeding the end of the wire through on both sides. By doing that kind of almost training mark, that first initial bend, it will encourage the rest of the wire to fall in line whenever now I can just brace quite firmly with my thumb and cinch this around. It'll continue where that bend had already started to happen. Okay, and then coming off to that side. So now flipping this around, let's go ahead and pull down and in. And to achieve symmetry in wire wrapping can be really challenging, at least for me. Like, that's probably one of the hardest parts, is to get it to look the same on both sides. So I double check my work every step as I go. And on a piece like this, where you can actually count 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can just double, triple, quadruple check that things are actually happening where we want them to, and we can use these indentations as markers to be like, okay, so I want the wire to cross in the 7th notch. So we can open that up a bit, bring that wire over and cinch down, and then we want it to cross up from underneath in the bottom of the 6th. So no, actually I think the bottom of the 7th. I think that looks real nice. Oops, didn't mean to go off camera there. So by all means experiment and see what you like and what's kind of going on there. But that way, ooh, it still looks a bit wonky though, doesn't it? Wonder what happened there. I think it's just thicker here than it is there. Meh. Oh well, it's art, it happens. Despite our best or worst efforts, it's gonna do what it wants to do. Yeah, so with that being the case, we could actually smush the back in just a bit and pull this around, because it might be more important to us that this tip is centered than it is that the wire's laying correctly. Oh, this just went all kinds of weird, didn't it? That's okay though. We've got this. So there's our other wire. So following around, we do have the option here, if we want our coiling to last longer, we can grab it near the base and kind of just stretch, and you can see I almost doubled the length of what we have to work with. Well, or by at least another half time, but I do prefer smoosh, just a little bit of a denser coiling. So with this being how it is, I'm going to go ahead and snip just about maybe 1/4 of an inch past where the coiling stops whenever it's relaxed on both sides. Now again, we're pretty asymmetrical here. Which I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of bummed me out, but let's see if there isn't something to be done. Sometimes you just have to fiddle with it a whole bunch. Sometimes the fiddling makes it worse, sometimes it makes it better, but we're learning. It's okay. There we go. And worst case scenario, that's why I buy my wire in big old spools. Sometimes you just have to scrap it, bury it in the backyard and salt the bones and start over. So now I'm going to come in with my round nose pliers, and I'm going to grip as close to the tip of the wire and as close to the tip of the pliers as I can. And I use my finger to push on the back side of the spiral to keep it two-dimensional. And I'll demonstrate here real quick. So, and I'm trying really hard to not squeeze the heck out of it and leave plier dents. And I'm just coming in nice and tight like that. So let's just demonstrate real quick. Because with this 16 gauge copper cord wire from Parawire, it is pretty close to dead soft, but it's pretty durable too. So you can come in here and you can see, maybe if the camera will focus, if you really squeeze with your pliers, it can leave little dents. So, but I had to like really squeeze. So the more you practice, the more you'll be able to determine what hand strength you need to use. And if that happens, you can just snip it off and you'll have a slightly smaller spiral. And I do recommend practicing with your scrap wire. Like, I save a little cup of scrap wire always, because you never know when you might be able to get a second or third use out of it. But also, just if I want to double and triple check and make sure that I have the muscle memory down or that motion right, or if I'll even like that shape, I can test it on some scrap first. So we'll practice just bringing that loop around and then bringing the, I'm going to zoom out so you can see my hand motion. So I go from like palm up to just bringing it around, and then I go as far as my hand is comfortable, and then I remove it and replace my pliers. I like to make loose little spirals a lot of the time. I think they look more like flowy and organic. And so whenever I'm doing this, I try to focus the bending on this point of the wire. But we can also come in and bring it very close to the spiral and just use our fingers or use our pliers to push it and have the wire stack on itself. So the reason that I use my finger on the back side though is you want to start with, if your wire is wonky like this, like kind of just bent weird and stuff, the closer to straight that you can have your wire, the better result that you're going to get. But if I don't have my finger there on the back side, then it can have it's just like whenever we're doing that 90-degree bend. It moves the tension, like it's giving me some really weird, I mean, honestly, it's kind of cool. Like, I think it looks like a little vine tendril, but a very loose, very, I don't have very much control over what the wire is doing. So it gives us a point of resistance that we can bend against. And it had like almost a 3-dimensional, whereas with my finger there on the back side, it lets me get a little bit more control over what's going on. Or you can always come in and touch it up or smush it, or maybe that's just how your spirals come out, in which case embrace it. I've been wire wrapping for over a decade at this point, and spirals can be elusive little beasts. So back at it. I'm going to get to this point on the other side of our little spiral making. So grabbing, coming around. But yeah, you can see I've flipped my hand all the way around. I'll zoom out again. And so my hands are almost at odds with each other, but as we come around, I can get a much deeper twist around. Now also, I want this one to be pretty snug and tight, so I'm butting the wire up against itself right from the get-go. And this is a great place to use some nylon jaw pliers, but I have broken mine. So I'm just going to use my bent nose, but I'm gripping and cinching that spiral in. And again, I don't want to grip too hard at this point because I could still smush through the thinner weaving wire. Like, this really would have been ideal to do with my nylon jaw. So I'm going to have to get myself onto Amazon and buy a new pair. Or Rio Grande. Rio Grande has really great plier selection as well. Okay, so just take that, smoosh, getting it nice and smushed down. Trying to pretend like it's symmetrical. Like, at this point, I think I've given up. Morning. I'm in mourning. So now, I know that's pretty, but it's still not a necklace. So now we're going to go through with this bare wire, and we're going to make it wearable. And I like to use the wire that's already there as the resistance. It helps me kind of hold everything in place, and I can bend against it and get similar shaping. So we've done that first training bend. Then I'm going to kind of round this wire out a little bit with my finger so that I can feed it through without getting any like sharp bends and kinks and stuff. And I'm just going to come out on the other side of our spiral. And at this point, it's all artsy-fartsy. So long as we make 2 connection points on each shoulder of the piece, it doesn't really matter. And I say shoulder because I kind of visualize, like, if the pendant, so if the focal point is a body, like the little head would be here, and this is the neck, and these are the shoulders, and so yeah, I don't know, it's just my own kind of imagery, I guess. So we've come around, and just that layering and that contrast and texture, I think, gives it a really nice element. I like it, at least. And that's the main thing, is whenever you're designing your own jewelry or following along with a tutorial or even making custom work for a client, make what you like. Nobody can do what you do better than you. So follow your heart, follow your inspiration, and make the thing. So there really, really is no right or wrong way to do any of this stuff. So I am going to come in, so as long as it doesn't like pain you to wear it or fall apart. Like, those are the 2 criteria that I'm like, if it's not cutting me and it's not like falling apart on my body, then okay. Like, it's done, I guess. Hopefully somebody will like it. But I have our wires coming off towards the back, and I'm going to grip here with my mandrel pliers using the smallest mandrel, which I think is like a 2 or 3 millimeter. And I'm just going to come around like so. And then wandering off camera, and I just want to get a little loop like this kind of going. So let's do that same thing on the other side. Flipping my pliers around, bringing it around. And for symmetry's sake, on this side, I traveled the loop in a downward motion, like working away from the head of our piece. So on this side, I want to make sure that I cross, not here between the head and the shoulder, but just bring that wire down a bit. And this way, we can make it travel in the same direction. Just kind of having the wire follow the same path as the other side can really make a big difference, I think. Now, from this point, I'm going to wander off camera again, twist it just a bit. And you could have just had it like that right from the get-go, but I don't know, maybe I want to keep it, I kind of want to keep it sideways. I didn't on this one, but we'll try it just to see. So bringing that back around, and I really like these mandrel pliers because on my round nose pliers, they're kind of like tapered, whereas here I have this whole section that's that same size, so it helps me to keep my stuff from getting weird. And I'm just gripping and cinching down so it's holding very tight to the pendant. And I'm going to continue around right here. And I'm going to have this travel behind our pendant. So just like that. So I've done 2 loops. I think it makes it look more structural, though with the 16 gauge you can definitely get away with only doing 1 loop. It's a very strong, durable wire. So also it helps to maintain symmetry by having, if you have your wires traveling out at the same angles, then it'll maintain the same, almost bend points. So I'm just going to come in here, bringing this around, and from the back I'm just smushing down. I want that bend to kind of happen like that. So I'm probably describing in excruciating detail for anybody who has wire wrapping experience, but my heart is always, always with the beginner, and sometimes something that seems very obvious to somebody who's been doing it for a long time, there might be a little grain of something in there that's just elusive to the first time or 10th time or 100th time wrapper. So YouTube does have a great option where you can put it into like 2 times speed, or you can just skip ahead, or you can move on and find a tutorial that's more suited to you. So I'm going to keep babbling at myself. So we've come around, and again, I'm making a curve in the wire so that I can bring the tip through, pulling through to the front, and then traveling up right there. The spacing's not quite, oh well. I'm going to come in with my pliers, tighten that down, see if I can't fiddle with it. Doesn't seem like it, so this is life now. And so from here, we have our connection points. So we could continue to spiral down, we could add some beads, we could get crazy with it. So that's where I'd really love to see y'all's natural variations and things come through. But just for the sake of emulating this design, I'm going to snip 2 fingers and a bit. So about that much from the end. Save those little bits of scrap because we'll be able to use them later on in the necklace. So 2 finger widths and a bit. I measure with my hands a lot because I typically have them on hand. Lows. Sorry, I think I'm funny. And now I'm going to do another spiral on each side. So I like to get that tip nice and tight and then just grab and let it bend in. I'm just kind of cinching everything around, and now from here you can see our spiral came out flattish, but our pendant is curved. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to grip and bend with my pliers a bit, and then I'm going to smush it with the side and hope that it stays. So let's do that same thing on the other side. Just gripping, coming around. There are some folks out there who do amazing, very meticulous, very geometric, like symmetrical wire wrapping, and I really admire their work. I am not one of those people, so I have just embraced the organic mess that I do make every time I go wire wrapping, and I enjoy it. It seems to have worked out reasonably well. I can't complain too much. So there we are with our wire wrapped focal point. I think I like it. And so now to make the rest of our necklace, we could just attach with some jump rings, some chain, and have that go along, but we had a lot of scrap left over. So I'm actually going to come through, and we could choose to do wrapped links, or with the 18 gauge, I'm going to show you first how to make just a basic bead link. And so what we're going to do is we're going to thread on one of our 4mm, one of our 6mm, which you could, if this were a gemstone or resin, just use whatever size and shape of bead that you want to be, complementary to the rest of the necklace. Like, that's truly just a design element. The only thing you want to watch out for is to make sure that it actually threads onto your wire. It can be kind of hard to find beads that will fit a 16 gauge wire through the hole that's been drilled. So I've just done a 90-degree bend, and I'm coming in. You could use your mandrel pliers. I like to use my round nose, and you can actually see I have filed in a little notch where that's like my favorite size to make loops. And we just come around like that. I like it to be just a little offset because that way the beads look centered. Like I want it to be in line with the center of the beads. And then if the notch is on this side, I like it to be an S as opposed to a C. So if this is the bottom of the S, I want our top spiral or our top loop to go the other way. I feel like it's a little bit more structural. Could be entirely in my head, but meh. It seemed reasonable 10 years ago when I started doing it, so I've just kind of kept doing it. and give ourselves a snip. It's always better to cut a little bit longer than what you think you might need, because you can always trim more off. But also, this is technically scrap wire. I don't believe in scrap wire. Even the scrap I still save because I'm going to melt it down and try lost wax casting with it, or maybe drawing out some of my own wire, or just, I don't know, like I hate to waste anything. So there's a little wrapped loop, and you could take that and just open one side of it. Whenever I open rings or loops, I always try to, if this is the loop, I try to open it like that, like where it opens up, because if we open it like this, we're losing the structural integrity, and it's very difficult to get it to be a nice circle again. So that's kind of why I do that. And we can just hook it through. I like making my loops the size that I have marked on my pliers because it can typically fit 2 wires through it. And I think that just makes a necklace look and feel much more substantial. And then bringing them together. So we would do that on each side, or we always have the option of coming through. Let me find another piece of 16 gauge scrap. And this one might actually be a little short. Like, it usually takes me about 3 or 4 inches, maybe 3.5 inches of wire to do a wrapped loop. But I'm going to test it and see before trying to use this scrap. So this one is 2.25 inches, and this one's 3.5. So I'm going to come in to about 1/3 of the way in of our wire and do a 90-degree bend. I'm going to take my pliers, place them right there on the bend, and just come around with my fingers. The 16 gauge can be pretty brutal to work with, so don't hesitate to grab your bent nose pliers, and still holding firmly but not pinching with our round nose pliers, we can come and bend this around. I do recommend, if this is your first project, or if you're still kind of getting used to your grip strength, use an 18, or if you're doing a wrapped loop like this, a 20 gauge wire. You're going to have a much easier time just building up your technique. So sometimes if I don't want to pinch with the round nose, I'll just change out for a different style of pliers. That way I can get that smush going without pinching. And so now we've made that loop, and whenever I'm making a necklace like this, it'll be like, okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads on each side. So I'd make 10 to this point, like 10 segments of wire up to this point, and then I would continue on with the next step of threading on the beads. Like, I'd put the beads on, and then come in, and I try to allow myself that same amount of space as what those 3 wraps took up on the other side. So I come in and I bend it, and then I'd set this off to the side and do all 10 segments. I hear you, puppy. Do all 10 segments up to that same point, because the amount of time that it takes me to sit down my pliers and pick up, like, find the next pair and pick them up and do the next step and send it down, it's like, I'm not a very organized person. Like, I'll lose it with it still in my hand, it feels like sometimes. So that saves me a lot of production time, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to place our pliers in there, bring this around. What you doing over there? And there's 1 rotation. I always try to do at least 2. Just, I don't know, good habit, and I like the way it looks maybe. But if I'm using like 20 gauge wire, or even I've done wrapping with this like with 22 and 24 gauge with success, I like to do 3 rotations because I feel like it's much more solid that way. If you do barely even 1 full rotation, it's not nearly as structural. Like if your necklace gets snagged on something and it's a thinner gauge wire, it's not going to hold up. So I'm going to snip that just as close as I can. And then I'm going to get in here with my bent nose and smoosh. Just get that in so that there are no pokey bits. So that'll be one of our connectors. And these ones are very sturdy. Like you'd have to get in there and cut it for the bracelet or the necklace to break. So the next step that we'll be doing in connecting these is I could just open the end of this loop and attach it to there, but aesthetically I want to be consistent, and also I'm just coming through and opening our copper ring, hooking on our link, and then hooking on our link, and then closing. And then I'm going to double that. So I'm going to put another ring directly through where we just were, and then I'm going to close it. And then I really love these stepped pliers from Rio Grande. They're the 2mm stepped nose pliers for joining that together. So that's how I join whenever I have a bunch of wrapped links. So whenever I extend the necklace this way and it's more wrapped links, that's what I'll be doing. So I'm going to go off camera because this can be pretty time consuming, and I'm going to make the rest of those components, and then I'll show you guys how we attach the chain. So we've gone ahead and finished our links. On the original necklace, I had done 5 links on either side because this necklace has been designed to be worn a little bit longer. I'm going to be selling this one on my Etsy shop where I can customize the length specifically to the client very easily because I'm at home, I'm in my shop, I have all of my tools and materials. This piece, however, will be for sale out of my booth whenever we travel to different art shows and conventions and such. So I want it to be able to be much shorter, just because I've found most of the necklaces that I make for in my booth have a base length of 18 inches. And I want to be able to showcase the whole of the design, which includes the transition from beads to just plain chain. And that's just something that we've found, like when we're selling at an anime convention, our main demographic is like 14 to 17-year-olds. So they tend to have like a 16-inch neck. So we have the necklaces be adjustable from, so long as it's not like a choker style. We'll have our necklaces be adjustable from 18 to 22 inches with the option to be able to add more extender chain there at the show, but we're just a little bit more limited by the materials that we have on hand, so I try to make the necklace a little bit more easily modified for whenever we're going to be having it in our booth. So I'm just coming through with these jump rings, which I try to not use jump rings that are thinner than, if I'm only going to be using one of them, I try to not go thinner than 18 gauge. If I'm going to be doubling up, I try to not go thinner than 20 gauge. And even then though, like, I feel like I'm kind of pushing it, like, if I'm using 20 gauge, even if it's doubled up, I like to use like maybe welded rings or something, or maybe I'll go through and spot solder them, but that gets complicated, especially whenever we're using enameled, because if I were soldering these guys, the enameling would burn off of the main wire. So I just kind of, little elements like that are good to keep in mind whenever we're working on our pieces. Be like, you know, how are we going to keep it? Because like right now, like I'm going to pull on this. I'm pulling quite hard, like quite hard. And nothing budged. Like at that point, it's gonna hurt your neck. So I'm gonna come through now, and this chain is not welded. You could opt for a welded chain, but those are significantly more expensive, and we try to keep our price point as low as is reasonable on our jewelry. So we're coming through, and again, it's quite strong unless it becomes compromised by like snipping it or something, and I'm going to use a doubled up length of it. So right now, let's measure our necklace. We are sitting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, around 8 inches. So I want to do 8 more inches of chain. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've measured off. I have on the edge of my work table little notches, if you can see, cut with a like just the edge of a file into the wood at 1 inch increments, so that I'm not constantly losing my ruler. And just so I don't have to measure twice, I'm holding it with my snips and then finding the end, snip, and then I'm coming around and snip. So there we are on that, and I'm going to put the rest of this chain back into its baggie. Just tidy up as we go along. Now, something that we could have done on this necklace that I think would have looked really cool would have been to have incorporated little segments of like a copper Byzantine chainmail weave, like doing hybrid necklaces like this where it's not just wire wrapping, but maybe incorporating a little bit of beadwork like strung beads or a little bit of wire wrapped bead links and chainmail. Gives a little bit of taste of both without doing a ton of chainmail, because that can get really, if it's not your thing, chainmail can get really daunting really fast. So I'm just taking our chain and then passing it through the link right there. And the way that we're going to be connecting our clasp is using this 4mm chain from the Ring Lord. I'm going to use, let's do 5 inches of the chain. Just measuring that off. And with this stuff, I like to open it. And setting that back off into its little segment. And I'm going to just remove one of the rings from here. Grabbing both of our lengths of chain. Let's see if zooming in doesn't help. Hopefully the camera will decide to stay in focus and I'll stop shaking it, but I wouldn't count on it. And I'm just going to hook through the far end link on both of them, on both of the ends of the chain. So there's 1, 2, and now I'm just going to add our clasp. Based on the specifications of clients, we'll determine whether I make the clasp for a right or left-handed putting it on. Just again, another way to personalize the jewelry for people. But so that's how that's sitting. And now over here on the other side, I'm going to take our chain and I'm going to pass it through. You could also use cord and have it be a slide adjust necklace. Like there are a lot of different ways, you guys, of how you could go about doing this. This is just one of many that I've found for me I enjoy doing. I like the look of it and it holds up well, and it's sold pretty well out of our booth and on our Etsy shop. So I'm trying to pass on what works for us to you guys so you can try it out and hopefully it'll work for you. And if it doesn't, keep trying something else. Find your way of going about it. And so now this necklace can be worn at 16 inches or 21 inches. And you'll notice for that the clasp is a little offset. We do typically bring a couple of bags of chains of the extender chain with us to conventions, or we might scavenge from other pieces that we have in inventory. And if somebody wanted the necklace extended, we would extend on the clasp side. That way the clasp will stay a little bit more centered up for whoever's wearing it. And sometimes too, if it's again off of our Etsy shop, where we tend to charge a little bit more on our Etsy because there's a little bit more going on, but I'll often put a little counterweight charm hanging off the back of the extender chain, which can keep a slightly heavier necklace from just pulling down on the back of your neck. And it also helps keep your necklace centered in the front if it has a counterweight in the back. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. If you guys have any questions, comments, or ideas, please leave them down below, and let's try on our necklace and see how it sits. Ooh, I like that. There should be maybe pictures on the screen. Sorry, I'm going through my mental list of projects by some of our very talented patrons who have sent in images of their work to be featured, whether it was based on this tutorial or just something that they felt like making. Listed down in the video description will be their like shop names and screen names, just however they wanted to be featured, listed in order of how they're being presented on screen. If you guys would like to follow their work, I highly encourage you to do that. It's really great to get to see other people's interpretations of my tutorials, to see things that they've come up with, things that they've done based on other people's tutorials. Like it's a really inspiring community to be a part of, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So check those people out. Also down in the video description are links to my own social media if you want to follow along with what I'm doing. We also have links to our Etsy shop where you can purchase pieces, or stay tuned for our live auctions that we have at the time of recording. We're having them once a month, but there's a calendar on our website and Discord of our different like monthly events and stuff, whether it's live streams or vending events or auctions, so that way you guys can stay up to date with us. Also, if you enjoy my tutorials and would like to support the creation of more of them, please consider joining our Craft Along Club over on Patreon. It starts at just $1 a month, and you get sneaky peeky access to our tutorials before they're released to the public. You get all sorts of behind the scenes content, patron exclusive live streams, and all of this is just the $1 tier. We try to give you more the more you pledge, and we also do our monthly craft kits and different things, so please consider checking that out. Or you can just follow us too, because we post a lot of Patreon exclusive stuff that is exclusive in the sense that you don't have to be a pledger to see it, but we only post it on Patreon. So like different work in progress things, work in progress pictures and things like that. So I'm gonna stop rambling. I will see y'all in our next video. So until next time, you guys, happy crafting. Bye.